The HOA built a luxury floating restaurant on my private lake like it was a stage they could rent by the hour. And 6 hours before their grand opening, their president stood on my dock at sunrise, smiled right in my face, and told me to get over my dead wife's memories. I'm not proud of what I felt in that moment. The heat behind my eyes, the way my jaw locked so hard my teeth hurt. But I am proud of what I did next because I didn't yell, I didn't swing, I didn't beg. I just looked at her, looked at that floating marble monster glittering on my water, and thought, okay, you want to play with my grief, then you're about to learn what a century-old contract can do to a modern ego. Her name was Cordelia Blackthorne, and she had that kind of expensive confidence that only comes from never hearing no in a way that actually sticks. Behind her, the restaurant gleamed like a lie, told with perfect posture. White marble pavilion, crystal chandeliers catching the first orange light, tables laid out like a wedding for 200 people, gold-rimmed plates and folded napkins like little swans. And the smell, Lord, the smell lobster and truffle and butter drifting over the water like someone was trying to perfume the whole morning. Staff ran around in pressed uniforms. A few cameras were already setting up, a local reporter practicing her "this is exciting" smile. Somebody mentioned the mayor's name like it was a blessing. Cordelia watched all of it like a queen inspecting her parade. Then she turned back to me and tapped the dock rail with a manicured nail. "Your little loophole from the 1920s gave us rights," she said like she was explaining a parking rule. "This is our spot now. Get over your dead wife's little sunset memories." You ever have a sentence land so hard you feel it in your ribs? Because I did. That lake, that water, wasn't just scenery. It was the one place that still felt like Sarah was nearby, like if I sat quiet enough, I might hear the soft scratch of her pencil again, might catch that little laugh she'd do when she got a flower wrong and then fixed it with 2 quick strokes. Sarah was my wife. 30 years together, 2 years gone. Cancer doesn't take politely. It takes everything, and it leaves you with this silence that feels unfair. When Sarah passed, I scattered her ashes under the memorial oak at the water's edge, the same oak where we'd carved our initials decades earlier, young and stupid and sure the world was ours. Her final words to me were simple, and they've stayed lodged in my chest like a nail. "Promise me this place stays peaceful forever." And I promised. So when Cordelia threw my grief back at me like it was trash she wanted out of the neighborhood, I felt something cold settle into my bones. Not rage exactly, more like clarity. The kind you get right before a storm breaks. She didn't know what I knew. She didn't know my grandfather had written a hidden clause into the deed, something so old, so boring looking, so devastatingly legal that it might as well have been a loaded weapon in a filing cabinet. And she definitely didn't know that in exactly 6 hours I was going to open a drain that could empty that lake like pulling the plug on a bathtub. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You deserve the full nightmare because this didn't start at sunrise. This started 6 months earlier with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and the sound of designer heels crunching down my gravel driveway like someone marching into battle for fun. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm 52, retired Army Corps of Engineers. I've spent most of my life building things that keep other people safe. Bridges, culverts, drainage systems. The unglamorous stuff that matters when the rain won't stop and the ground starts moving. I inherited 40 acres from my grandfather. Pristine wilderness, spring-fed, crystal-clear lake been in our family since 1923. There's this smell out there, pine sap and wild honeysuckle, that can take me back in a heartbeat to childhood summers, fishing with cheap hooks and big dreams, thinking my grandfather could fix anything in the world with a wrench and a calm voice. Sarah and I built our life there. Not a mansion, not a statement property, just a cabin. We loved a dock I built with my own hands and evenings that felt like the universe finally exhaled. We'd sit out on that dock every night, loons calling across the water, wood smoke drifting from the chimney, the soft lap of water against the dock posts like the lake was breathing. Sarah would sketch wildflowers. I'd plan whatever project I'd talk myself into next. That rhythm became our lullaby. Then she got sick. Then she got smaller. Then she was gone. And I tried to keep the promise. I really did. I stayed quiet. I stayed home. I let grief do what grief does, wander around the rooms like a ghost that doesn't know where to sit. That's when the new subdivision next door started filling up. Fresh sidewalks, fresh sod houses stacked close enough you could hear your neighbor sneeze. And with that subdivision came an HOA, and with that HOA came Cordelia. Picture someone who treats a neighborhood like a personal kingdom. Perfect nails that tapped impatiently on steering wheels. A white SUV that always looked freshly washed and slightly angry. She smelled like expensive perfume layered over something sharper, like stress. She talked in that polished corporate tone people use when they're trying to sound helpful while slowly pushing you off a cliff. The first time she showed up, it was a Tuesday morning. I remember because the light was bright and honest, the kind of morning that should have been peaceful. I was splitting wood just trying to stay busy when I heard it heels on gravel, that crunchy, deliberate sound. She didn't wave, didn't introduce herself like a normal person. She walked up with a clipboard and a tape measure like she was about to size me for a coffin. "Mr. Morrison," she said, and my name sounded like a complaint. "I'm conducting a mandatory community compliance review. Your waterfront setup violates multiple setback ordinances." I looked at her, then at the lake, then back at her. "Ma'am," I said, "this property was here long before your subdivision existed. Everything here is legal." She smiled like I was adorable. Then she whipped out a survey that looked fresh off a printer, so crisp it practically crackled. According to updated boundary assessments, she said the community property line runs through the center of this lake. You're illegally monopolizing shared water resources. It was a lie dressed up as paperwork. I went inside and pulled out my grandfather's original deed, real parchment from 1923, raised county seal, the whole thing. It felt like holding history in my hands. I laid it out on the porch like I was placing a trump card on a table. "Here's the actual survey," I said. "My property extends 50 feet beyond the far shoreline." Cordelia's face did that funny thing, like the mask slipped for a second and you saw the impatience underneath. She'd expected me to be confused, maybe scared, maybe eager to comply. Instead, I was calm, and calm makes people like her itchy. "Mr. Morrison," she said, and her tone shifted into something colder. "This community has evolved. We can't have one selfish individual hoarding premium waterfront while property values suffer." Then she looked at my cabin like it was a stain. "A man of your background surely understands strategic repositioning. There are lovely senior communities where someone your age could live more appropriately." That line hit harder than the legal nonsense, because it wasn't about the lake. It wasn't about setbacks. It was about erasing me, erasing what Sarah and I built, turning my life into an inconvenience they could relocate. I kept my voice even, but inside I was shaking. "My wife's ashes are under that oak tree," I said. "This property stays in my family. If you have legal concerns, hire a lawyer." Cordelia's smile turned arctic. "Oh, sweetie," she said, like she was tasting the word. "You don't grasp how community development works in the modern era. This lake represents millions in untapped commercial potential." She climbed back into her SUV tires, cutting little ruts in my driveway like she wanted to leave scars, and as she pulled away, she tossed one last line over her shoulder. "This community deserves better than your hillbilly compound, Jake. Change is coming whether you like it or not." That's when I knew this wasn't a disagreement, this was war. And the harassment started immediately. Within a week, I had violation notices taped to my front door like I was some delinquent teenager. Excessive vegetation for the wildflowers Sarah planted. Noise ordinance violation for splitting wood at 7 in the morning. Unpermitted structures for my grandfather's old storage shed that had been sitting there since before Cordelia was born. Each citation came with a $500 fine and Cordelia's signature looping dramatic with little hearts dotting the I's like she was signing a love letter to her own authority. I paid exactly $0. In the Army, you learn something fast. When someone attacks you with paperwork, you respond with research. So I dug into the HOA documents, county records, property covenants. All of it. Turns out an HOA can only enforce rules on properties that voluntarily join through signed agreements. My grandfather's homestead predates their entire subdivision. It was legally untouchable unless I'd surrendered those rights in writing, which I hadn't. So I started documenting everything. I bought a 3-ring binder and filled it like it was a mission file, timestamps, photos, copies of notices. The snap of binder clips became my favorite sound because every snap meant she was giving me more ammunition. Then the anonymous complaints started. Calls to the county about dangerous military equipment, environmental hazards, illegal waste systems. I'd wake up to the metallic ping of survey stakes being hammered into my ground by some inspector who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Health inspector, fire marshal, building code enforcement. They came, they looked, they sighed. They all found the same thing: my place was fine, better than fine. One Inspector Williams showed up so many times he started looking embarrassed. After his 3rd visit, he leaned in like he was telling me a secret. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "that woman's been calling twice a week for months. I had to come out here just to shut her up. Your place is cleaner than most city parks." He looked tired, like Cordelia had been draining him too, just in a different way. That's when I installed security cameras. Not because I wanted to live like a paranoid man, but because I'd learned something in my line of work. If you don't document reality, someone else will rewrite it. The cameras caught late-night footage that made my stomach twist. Cordelia creeping around with a flashlight and measuring tape. Unknown vehicles crawling past my gate at 2 in the morning. Someone trying to yank out my boundary markers, scattering the second my motion lights flared on. But the real shock came during one of her legitimate daytime visits. She was showing my property to buyers. I found the listing online by accident, and I swear my coffee froze halfway to my lips. There it was, my dock, my cabin, my memorial oak tree presented like community amenities. Prime commercial waterfront requiring responsible development. And then the part that made my hands go numb, unique opportunity to acquire underutilized lakefront property currently occupied by elderly hermit, unwilling to embrace community progress. Elderly hermit. I was 52. I could still deadlift a bag of concrete and swear like a sailor. But to Cordelia, I was just in the way. I started digging into her background, and the pattern came up clean as a blueprint. Failed real estate ventures in other states. A specialty in targeting older property owners near lakes and rivers. Bankruptcy filings that vanished after last-minute settlements. This wasn't just harassment, it was predation. Professional, practiced, and ugly. She escalated again. She organized a neighborhood petition to declare my property a public nuisance. She went door to door painting me as an unstable veteran, implying PTSD, implying danger. She described my wood-splitting routine like it was a threat. Flyers started appearing everywhere, fresh ink smell, smug little bullet points about how my presence endangered kids and property values. One claimed I was stockpiling military weapons. Apparently my grandfather's antique hunting rifles qualified as an arsenal now. And here's the thing. I could feel the neighborhood shifting. People I'd nodded to for years started avoiding my eyes. Not all of them, but enough. Lies spread faster than truth because truth requires effort, and lies come with a confident smile and a printed flyer. That's when I called Tom Bradley. Tom and I go back to my Army days. He's a property lawyer now, the kind of guy who reads contracts like other people read menus. I handed him my binder and he flipped through it, and then he started laughing so hard I thought he'd choke. "Jake," he said, wiping his eyes, "this woman has zero legal standing. You're not even in their jurisdiction. But keep documenting. She's building a harassment case against herself." So I kept documenting, and I started attending HOA meetings. Now listen, nothing rattles a control freak like an unexpected witness. Cordelia would stand at the front of the community center with her rehearsed "we're all one family" tone, and I'd sit in the back quietly taking notes, letting her words hang in the air. Then I'd raise my hand. "Can you explain why the financial records aren't available anymore? Can you show the legal basis for enforcing rules on non-member properties? Why are HOA funds paying for what looks like personal expenses?" You could hear chairs creak, people shifting. The room getting uncomfortable. In that way, truth tends to make it. Some residents started asking their own questions. And Cordelia started realizing her slow squeeze wasn't working. She needed a bigger weapon. That's when she unveiled the easement. An historic discovery, she called it. A 1920s water access easement that supposedly gave the entire community rights to my lake. The paper looked old, the seal looked official, but it still smelled faintly like fresh ink, like somebody tried to age it with tea and then got impatient. She held an emergency meeting. People were excited like kids hearing they suddenly own a pool. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia announced, "this changes everything. The Morrison property was never exclusively private. Our entire community has legal water access dating back to the original homestead agreements." And then she brought in a lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit who talked like he could turn a puddle into international shipping lanes. He used PowerPoint slides and nautical charts and claimed my spring-fed lake qualified as navigable waters under federal jurisdiction. He said commercial restrictions would violate interstate commerce. I sat there clicking my pen, listening, letting them spin their fantasy. Because while they were playing dress-up with legal words, I was remembering something. Historical easements are public record if you know where to look. And in my world, you learn to look. I found the real easement. It did exist. But it wasn't what they said. It was for emergency, well water during drought conditions, not recreational access. Domestic water supply only during times of municipal shortage, and it automatically expired when city water lines reached our area in 1952. Any lawyer worth his license should have caught that. Which told me something else. They weren't being sloppy. They were being greedy. Then the twist came from a place I didn't expect. 3 days later at 7 in the morning, a man rang my doorbell. He stood on my porch holding blueprints like they were evidence at a crime scene. His name was Marcus Samuel, and he looked like a guy who'd just realized he'd been pushed off a cliff and only noticed halfway down. "Mr. Morrison," he said, checking his phone, "GPS against my property markers. I need to ask you something. Did you agree to lease waterfront space for a commercial dining facility?" I almost choked on my coffee. "I'm sorry, what restaurant?" He unrolled the blueprints. "A floating dining pavilion designed for my exact lake dimensions. Seating for 150 kitchen specs, lighting plans, everything." And then he dropped the number that made my stomach turn. "Cordelia collected my $75,000 development deposit 3 weeks ago," he said. "She told me you were eager to begin construction." That was the moment the whole puzzle snapped into place. Cordelia wasn't just harassing me. She was running an investment scam using my property like collateral she didn't own. I told Marcus the truth. His face went red, anger, embarrassment, panic, all fighting for space. And then instead of storming off, he did something that surprised me. He became my ally. He gave me copies of agreements, emails, financial records, proof she'd been shopping the same exclusive opportunity to multiple investors, collecting deposits, promising guaranteed returns. I installed steel property markers, that same day professional-grade concrete footings, GPS coordinates. The thunk of the post-hole digger hitting bedrock felt like therapy, because some battles need physical proof, not just words. My surveyor confirmed what my grandfather's deed already said. My property line extended beyond the far shore. Any structure on that water was mine, which meant their restaurant would be trespassing even if they tried to pretend otherwise. But Cordelia didn't back down. She doubled down. She organized community wellness walks that just happened to pass through my property. Groups of neighbors following her like she was leading a parade, trampling Sarah's wildflowers, pointing at spots for picnic tables like they were planning a takeover. Every step on my gravel path sounded like an invasion, and every step got recorded. 3 months before opening day, Cordelia made it official. She announced a partnership with Lakeside Dining Experiences, LLC, to build a luxury floating restaurant on what she now called community water. Glossy brochures hit mailboxes promising skyrocketing property values. Renderings of white tablecloths and champagne service under twinkling lights. I looked up the LLC through state records. It had been registered 3 weeks earlier. Owner Cordelia Blackthorne. So she was building herself a restaurant on stolen land using stolen money and calling it community development. Honestly, you almost have to admire the audacity. Almost. Construction began on a Tuesday morning, diesel engines roaring at dawn, barges and equipment showing up on my shoreline like an invading army. I walked down and met the foreman, Rodriguez, sun-weathered and confused. "Ma'am told us this was community development," he said, flipping through work orders. "We got permits, environmental clearances." He handed me a thick stack of documents. They looked legit. Until I saw it. My signature. On an environmental waiver. It was close. Too close. Someone had practiced. But I've been signing my name for 52 years. I know my own hand like I know the feel of a wrench. The J was too rounded. The M too sharp. My middle initial wrong. "Mr. Rodriguez," I said carefully, "I never signed these. Someone forged my signature. This is fraud." His crew stopped dead. The sudden silence felt like stepping into a church after a storm. Nobody wants to build on disputed land when the real owner is standing there calling it a felony. Cordelia arrived within minutes, SUV tires spraying gravel. She marched down the dock, heels clicking like warning shots. "These professionals have contracted work to complete," she announced. "Permits are filed, timelines established, your cooperation is mandated under water access protocols." I held up the forged document. "Cordelia, you falsified my signature." For a flicker of a second, her face cracked. Then she recovered fast, sliding into that corporate crisis voice. "That's a serious accusation based on what could be administrative oversight," she said. "Clerical approximations happen." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Clerical approximations, is that what you call forgery now? And then another twist. Rodriguez pulled me aside, lowered his voice. "Mr. Morrison," he whispered, "this lady's been weird. Paid our deposit in cash, keeps changing specs. Yesterday she asked about installing hidden compartments in the kitchen for specialized storage." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a restaurant scam. This smelled like something dirtier. Money laundering, hidden compartments, cash, desperation. That night I looked deeper into Cordelia's finances. She'd borrowed $400,000 against her house. Maxed cards, spent investor money on personal expenses. She was broke and cornered, betting everything on a grand opening that would magically fix her mess. And she was too deep to stop. So I finally did what I'd been avoiding since Sarah died. I went down into my grandfather's basement. That basement smelled like old leather and forgotten years. Cedar dust, the faint ghost of lavender from my grandmother's sachets. Boxes stacked like layers of history receipts from the 1940s, warranty cards for equipment that rusted into oblivion, enough magazines to build a bunker. Then I found the cedar trunk, beneath quilts, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with string, my grandfather's legal files from the 1920s. When I unfolded those pages, brittle paper crackling under my fingers, I realized it wasn't just a deed. It was a full water management contract with the county. Back in 1923, downstream communities used to flood hard. My grandfather had been designated Watershed Flood Control Coordinator. His job was to manage water levels to prevent seasonal flooding. And the contract language? It made my heart race. Property owner maintains exclusive authority to control, divert, or drain water levels as necessary for flood prevention and community safety. Signed, witnessed, county seal. Then I found the maintenance manual, my grandfather's handwriting, detailed diagrams. A manual spillway system, underground culverts, controlled release gates, a setup that could drain the lake within 6 hours if flooding threatened downstream. Those concrete structures around the lake edge, they weren't decorative. They were part of a Depression-era engineering marvel. And here's the beautiful part. Any permanent structure on the lake surface counted as an obstruction to emergency flood control operations, subject to immediate removal. I stood there in that dusty basement, and for the first time in months, I felt something besides grief. I felt purpose. I drove straight to the county engineering office with copies. The current coordinator, young engineer named Stevens, verified the documents against records and looked like a kid finding buried treasure. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "this is valid. Your family has been our official watershed manager for nearly a century. When would you like to schedule your next flood control maintenance?" I smiled, and you could have cut the satisfaction with a knife. "How about Saturday morning at 11, I said. "I think it's time for a system test." The trap was set. Cordelia thought she controlled the lake through paperwork and intimidation. I controlled the drain plug legally. I started assembling a team because if you're going to pull a move like that, you do it clean. Witnesses, documentation, everything by the book. First call was to Colonel Mike Patterson. Old Army buddy, retired, now consults on infrastructure operations. He owed me a favor from deployment days, and he loved a good story. "You want me to witness what he asked?" "Routine flood control maintenance," I said. "A 1923 contract. Manual spillway. You bring your credentials and a camera." He chuckled. "Brother, that sounds way more fun than my usual work." Stevens was thrilled too. He was an engineering history nerd, the kind of guy who gets excited about gravity flow like it's a blockbuster movie. We filed official notice, proper forms, county approval. Local paper even wanted to cover it. Rebecca Walsh, the editor, called it preserving local history. Deputy Sheriff Clark showed interest because he remembered watching my grandfather drain the lake as a kid. "Like pulling a giant bathtub plug," he said, smiling like he could see it again. Meanwhile, Cordelia pushed forward like a runaway train. The restaurant reached completion: marble floors, chandeliers, professional kitchen equipment that probably cost more than my cabin. The smell of truffle oil and imported seafood drifted across my water like an insult. She held press conferences on my dock without asking. Local stations ate it up. Visionary HOA president revolutionizes rural dining. Glossy segments. Pretty shots. Nobody digging into the permits. Behind the scenes, she was unraveling. A county inspector arrived for pre-opening checks, clipboard badge, eyes sharp. He took one look at the paperwork and started marking violations like he'd been waiting for Christmas. "Ma'am," he said, "these permits show evidence of forgery. The seals are fake. The signatures don't match." Cordelia tried to bribe him, in daylight, on my dock, like she was offering a tip. He shut the restaurant down immediately, slapped bright red condemnation notices on the structure. Closed until legitimate permits could be produced. Permits that would never exist. So Cordelia called an emergency HOA meeting that night, packed room, and announced the restaurant would open anyway. "We've invested too much to let small-minded bureaucrats destroy our vision," she declared, voice teetering on hysteria. You could smell her anxiety under the perfume like something sour. And then the HOA treasurer, Janet Mills, quiet woman who'd clearly had enough, stood up with a thick folder. "Cordelia," she said, voice cutting through the room, "where is the $120,000 in HOA emergency funds?" Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Janet flipped open the folder, reading off unauthorized transactions, restaurant suppliers, construction companies, catering services. Over 100,000 stolen. The room erupted. People yelling, demanding refunds, threatening lawsuits. Someone called the police right there, phone held up like a weapon. Cordelia snapped, screamed at her board, accused everyone of sabotage, declared she'd open tomorrow even if she had to serve guests herself. She stormed out like a woman running from her own reflection. And Saturday morning arrived. Bright skies, perfect weather, the kind that makes arrogant people feel untouchable. By 10:30, the floating restaurant buzzed with activity despite being condemned. VIPs pulled in luxury cars crunching across my gravel driveway without permission. Mayor Thompson showed up. County commissioners, business leaders. A reporter from the state paper dressed like she expected champagne and compliments. Cordelia greeted them with manic energy, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future of community dining," she announced. 50 yards away, I stood by my spillway controls with Stevens Colonel Patterson filming and Deputy Clark watching for public safety. At exactly 11, I keyed my radio. "County engineer, this is Morrison Property Flood Control Coordinator. Beginning routine system maintenance as scheduled." Stevens answered, calm and official. "Confirmed. Mr. Morrison, you are authorized to proceed under the 1923 water management contract." I turned the first gate. The spillway groaned to life, deep mechanical sound like old steel waking up after a long sleep. Water began rushing into the underground drainage system with a steady roar that felt almost satisfying. Like the land itself was finally exhaling. Within 10 minutes, the lake level started dropping. Subtle at first, enough to make the restaurant platform settle slightly. Someone on the platform called out, "What's happening to the water?" Cordelia laughed it off. "Natural circulation," she said, waving her hand like she could dismiss physics. At 11:15, I opened the second gate. The lake dropped faster, 2 feet within 20 minutes. The restaurant tilted as its supports kissed the lake bottom. I watched expensive kitchen equipment slide across counters like it had a mind of its own. Servers grabbed champagne glasses before they rolled away. Guests started looking around, confusion turning into fear. Mayor Thompson's smile faltered. "Perhaps we should speak to the property owner," he said, voice tight. That's when I walked forward, contract in hand. "Good morning," I said into my microphone, voice steady. "I'm Jake Morrison, owner of this property and county-designated flood control coordinator for this watershed." I held up the yellowed papers so the cameras could see them. "Under authority granted in 1923, I'm conducting routine maintenance on our emergency spillway system. This drainage operation is legal and coordinated with county officials." Cordelia's face, you should have seen it. It went pale, then red, then something like panic breaking through the makeup. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I have guests, investors. This is community property now." I looked at her, really looked, and I kept my voice calm because calm is what drives people like her insane. "This was never community property," I said. "You've been operating an illegal business on private land using forged permits and stolen money." Then I turned the third gate. The lake level dropped again another 3 feet. The floating restaurant didn't gently settle. It crashed into mud with a grinding sound that echoed across the water like a dream dying. Crystal chandeliers swung, plates rattled, people screamed, formal shoes sank into muck. The smell of lobster and truffle mixed with wet mud and panic, turning fancy into pathetic in about 30 seconds. Guests fled, trying not to fall. Tux pants, splattered dresses dragged through sludge. Champagne bottles rolled like bowling balls across the tilted deck. Staff abandoned ship, hauling whatever equipment they could carry, wading knee-deep in mud like survivors of a shipwreck. Deputy Clark lifted his radio. "Unit 12, I need backup. We have fraud, trespassing, and about 200 angry people in formal wear." The news crew filmed everything. Every scream, every slip, every moment Cordelia's perfect control cracked into raw hysteria. She screamed at workers, threatened officials, accused me of domestic terrorism. She actually used that phrase like draining my own lake with county approval was some kind of war crime. And then the final twist rolled in like thunder. An FBI agent stepped onto the shore with a warrant. Sarah Samuel, Financial Crimes Unit. Calm face, clear voice, no patience for theater. "Cordelia Blackthorne," she said, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Cordelia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She tried to speak, tried to spin, but handcuffs have a way of ending speeches. As they led her away, she screamed one last thing at me, some promise that I'd pay, that it wasn't over, that I'd destroyed her vision. I looked at that restaurant sitting helpless in mud. Then I looked at my grandfather's spillway controls still humming with old-school reliability. "My grandfather built this to last," I called after her. "Your restaurant was always temporary." 6 months later, the lake was full again. Crystal clear within 2 weeks because the springs don't care about human drama. Birds came back, fish rebounded. Sarah's wildflowers bloomed like they were reclaiming the land. Cordelia pleaded guilty to a stack of federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering. 4 years in federal prison. Restitution ordered. Her house sold at auction and it still barely covered what she owed. The HOA dissolved after an audit found she'd siphoned off over $200,000 in community funds. Board members got dragged into civil suits. Most of them were cleared once it became obvious they'd been manipulated by a professional con artist wearing pearls. And the neighborhood, it changed. People who'd stayed quiet came with apologies that sounded small but sincere. Old neighbors Tom and Martha Hendricks helped me turn the property into something better than a battleground. We started a conservation education site. The county designated my grandfather's spillway system a protected historical landmark. Stevens helped build programs so kids could learn about gravity flow, mechanical advantage, and how your great-grandparents solved problems without apps and sensors. In the center of it all, Sarah's Memorial Oak became a gathering place, not a target. Native plant workshops, bird watching, environmental science classes. People sitting quietly under that tree learning to respect what they used to treat like a commodity. We even started an annual event, small at first, then bigger, the Sarah Morrison Conservation Festival. Families on the shore, canoe trips on the water, kids laughing. The kind of sound that doesn't erase grief, but it softens it, makes it bearable. And the floating restaurant. The platform got dismantled and recycled into materials for an education center, which still makes me smile because greed built that thing, but community learning is what came out of the wreckage. Now here's the moral in all of this, quiet, not preachy, just true. Power loves the illusion of permanence. People like Cordelia walk around like their confidence is a law of nature, like money can rewrite history, like grief makes you weak and therefore easy to move. But real strength, it's not loud, it's not glossy, it's not printed on brochures. Real strength is knowing what's yours, keeping records, staying steady when someone tries to bait you into becoming the villain in their story. And sometimes, real justice looks like a woman in designer heels sinking into mud while a century-old spillway does its job exactly like it was built to do. So let me ask you, if someone stood on your property, looked you in the face, and taunted you with the worst thing you've ever lived through, where's your line? Do you let it go for the sake of peace? Or do you push back even if it gets messy? Even if it puts you in the spotlight, even if it forces you to defend what you promised to protect? Tell me what you would have done. And if you've ever had someone try to take something from you with paperwork pressure or pure audacity, share it, because I swear there are more Cordelias out there than people want to admit.